Imagine a machine that exists in a gray area between brilliance and insanity. A machine that was never meant to be born, yet somehow escaped the laboratory. Picture this: a quiet suburban morning. A father buckles his two children into the back of a 7-seat family van. There are cupholders, soft leather, and DVD screens playing cartoons. But when he turns the key, the ground beneath the driveway doesn't just vibrate, it trembles. Under the hood lies a handcrafted 6.2-liter V8 engine, an atmospheric heart stolen from a supercar and transplanted into a body that should never have held it. This is not a sports car, it is a minivan. A minivan that can hunt a Ferrari F430 at a red light and leave it in a cloud of dust and utter confusion. This is a story about a vehicle so wrong that it almost feels forbidden, a project that Mercedes-Benz would eventually try to bury and forget. This is the dark, silent history of the R63 AMG, the fastest mistake ever made in Stuttgart. The R63 AMG was an impossible contradiction, a mechanical fever dream that defied every established law of the automotive world. It was a vehicle that simply should not have existed. Imagine the setting: an affluent neighborhood in the year 2007. A bright red Ferrari F430 pulls up to a stoplight, its engine humming with the arrogance of Italian racing heritage. Next to it sits a silver Mercedes. It looks like a van. It has the silhouette of a bloated station wagon. Inside, the children are arguing over a juice box. The Ferrari driver does not even look over. Why would he? Then, the light turns green dot. With a roar that sounds like the earth itself is tearing open, the silver van lunges forward. There is no tire smoke, only pure, violent traction. The Ferrari driver slams his foot down, but it is too late. By the time he hits second gear, the minivan is 2 car lengths ahead, its quad exhaust pipes screaming a metallic V8 symphony. In the back seat of the Mercedes-Benz, the children have not even looked up from their movie, shielded by double-pane glass and active air suspension, while their father experiences the G-forces of a fighter jet. This was the absurdity of the BR63. It was a statistical anomaly that felt like a glitch in the matrix of German engineering. The psychological impact on bystanders was one of pure, unadulterated confusion. Imagine a valet at a high-end hotel. He takes the keys to an R63, expecting the dull, heavy crawl of a family hauler. Instead, the moment he touches the throttle, the car surges with a terrifying urgency. He taps the brakes, and they bite with the force of a racing car, nearly throwing him through the windshield. He steps out, walks to the back, and sees the badge, AMG. He looks at the 7 seats and shakes his head. It makes no sense. Driving the R63 was an exercise in cognitive dissonance. On one hand, you were surrounded by the finest Napa leather and the familiar, comforting smell of a luxury Mercedes. On the other hand, you were wrestling with a 5,300-pound beast that wanted to warp space and time. When you threw it into a corner, you felt the massive weight shift, a heavy, ominous body roll that reminded you of the laws of physics. But then, the active suspension would fight back. The wide tires would claw at the asphalt, and the steering would transmit a vibration of raw power. It was a constant battle between violence and comfort. It was a car that felt like it was having an identity crisis every time you pressed the gas pedal. It was too fast to be a van, yet too heavy to be a sports car. It was a mechanical monster that occupied a lonely, dark corner of the market, where nobody else dared to stand. This madness did not emerge from a vacuum. It was the product of a corporate era defined by an intoxicating and dangerous level of hubris. To understand the R63, you have to understand the boardroom atmosphere of the early 2000s. This was the era of the Daimler-Chrysler merger, a marriage of equals that quickly descended into a chaotic struggle for global domination. Mercedes-Benz was no longer content being the world's premier luxury carmaker. They wanted more. They wanted everything. The boardroom mentality in Stuttgart had shifted. It was no longer about the quiet, meticulous pursuit of the best or nothing. Instead, it was a world of PowerPoint presentations and aggressive spreadsheets. The executives were chasing market share like a drug. They were obsessed with the American market, the land of the massive SUV and the suburban minivan. They looked at the success of cars like the Chrysler Town & Country and decided they needed a Mercedes-Benz version of everything. These were boardrooms full of suits who never actually drove the cars they approved. They were men who looked at graphs and saw synergy where there was only confusion. They believed that the 3-pointed star was a magic wand, that they could slap it on any vehicle, in any segment, and the world would bow. This was corporate blindness at its peak. The brand that once defined Teutonic discipline was now chasing every trend, desperate to fill every niche, no matter how illogical. The R-Class was the ultimate child of this identity crisis. It was an awkward, long-bodied creature, born from the desire to be a wagon, an SUV, and a van all at once. It was a vehicle designed by a committee that could not agree on a goal. Mercedes-Benz had lost its brand soul in the pursuit of volume. They were arrogant enough to believe that they could define a new category, the Grand Sports Tourer, and that the public would simply follow. But as they poured billions into the development of the R-Class platform, they failed to realize that they were building a bridge to nowhere. The R63 AMG was the final, most extreme symptom of this corporate fear. 5-100-3- horsepower, answer to a question that absolutely no one had asked. While the executives were busy looking at global sales targets, a different kind of madness was brewing in the quiet town of Afton. This was the home of AMG, a place that, at the time, operated like a sanctuary for the obsessed. In the mid-2000s, AMG was not the polished, integrated corporate division it is today. It was a collection of engineers who operated with a dangerously long leash. Their unofficial motto was V8 everything. No platform was sacred. If it had an engine bay, they would find a way to fit a monster inside it. Imagine an unnamed AMG engineer, sitting in a dimly lit workshop late at night, staring at the chassis of a pre-production ARC. He knows the car is flawed. He knows the market is confused. But he has been given a directive: make it an AMG. There were internal doubts. Even the most hardened mechanics whispered that this project would end badly. But there was also a dark, competitive genius at play. The engineers knew that the R-Class engine bay was never meant for the M156, the legendary 6.2-liter V8. It was an architectural nightmare. The cooling requirements alone were enough to drive a man to madness. They had to pack massive radiators, specialized oil coolers, and complex ducting into a space that was already overcrowded. This was not academic engineering. It was an emotional struggle against the limits of physics. Long nights were spent figuring out how to reinforce the subframe, so the torque would not twist the van's body like a soda can. They had to tune the 4MATIC all-wheel drive system to handle the violent surge of 500 horsepower, while still keeping the car civil enough for a mother to drive to the grocery store. There was an ethical tension in those workshops. They knew they were creating something absurd, something that bordered on irresponsible. But the V8 everything culture was intoxicating. It was a period of engineering without permission, where the goal was not to fulfill a customer need, but to see how far the three-pointed star could be stretched before it broke. It was a triumph of mechanical willpower over common sense. When that first prototype fired up, and that massive V8 barked to life inside the body of a family hauler, the engineers did not feel pride. They felt a strange, adrenaline-fueled sense of what have we done. It was the sound of German discipline, finally snapping, giving way to a beautiful, high-revving insanity. When the R63 AMG finally arrived in showrooms in the year 2007, the silence was deafening. It carried a sticker price of over $93,000. In today's money, after inflation, you were looking at over $135,000 for a minivan. For that same price, a customer could walk across the showroom and buy a flagship S-Class or a Porsche Cayenne Turbo. The buyer confusion was total. A wealthy family man would walk into the dealership, looking for a safe, prestigious way to transport his children. The salesman, visibly embarrassed, would try to explain why this particular van had quad exhaust and could out-accelerate a Ferrari. It is for the father who wants everything, the salesman would say, but the customers were not buying it. The marketing was a complete failure. There were no commercials, no glossy magazine spreads celebrating the R63. Mercedes-Benz seemed to realize the absurdity of the car the moment it was finished and tried to hide it. Dealers were stuck with six-figure anomalies that sat on the lot for months. It was a niche within a niche that was too expensive for families and too van-like for driving enthusiasts. It was a car without a home. The end came swiftly, as the R63 struggled to find even a single customer. The 2008 global financial crisis hit like a tidal wave. The era of excess was over. Suddenly, a high-consumption V8-powered supervan was not just a quirky mistake. It was a symbol of corporate tone-deafness. Gas prices soared, and the housing market collapsed. The world did not want a 155-mile-per-hour minivan. It wanted to survive. Sales for the R63 did not just drop, they stopped completely. In the United States, which was supposed to be the primary target of the vehicle, fewer than 200 units were ever sold. Globally, the numbers were even more haunting, with some estimates suggesting a total production run of less than 300 cars for the entire world. Mercedes, sensing the growing shadow on their reputation, did the only thing they could do to save face. They killed it. The R63 AMG was quietly removed from the brochures after just 1 year of production. There was no press release and no farewell. It was just a silent cancellation for a car that was meant to be a roar of dominance. For the few who actually bought the R63, the dream quickly turned into a financial and psychological nightmare because the production run was so microscopic. The car became a technical pariah. Many replacement parts were specific to the AMG model and were not shared with the standard ARC. A failure of a specialized suspension sensor or a unique exhaust component could lead to weeks of waiting for a part to be shipped. From a remote warehouse in Germany, maintenance was a horror story. The engine was so tightly packed into the bay that routine tasks often required hours of labor just to access the components. Owners faced astronomical repair bills sometimes. $5,000 for a simple oil leak, or $7,000 for a brake job. It was a money pit that most independent shops were afraid to touch. For a decade, the R63 lived in the shadows, a source of deep regret for owners who realized they had bought a unicorn that was eating them alive. But then, the internet began to do what it does best. It turned a failure into a legend. In an age of sanitized, turbocharged SUVs that all look the same, the raw, naturally aspirated insanity of the R63 began to look like a work of art. A cult culture grew around the vehicle. Enthusiasts on YouTube and Reddit started sharing stories of the van that could beat a Ferrari. The rarity that once made it a maintenance hell now made it a legendary unicorn. Collector interest began to spike. People realized that Mercedes-Benz would never, ever build something this crazy again. Today, the R63 AMG is a holy grail for collectors. Prices at auctions have defied gravity, with clean examples selling for nearly their original MSRP. The fastest mistake has been resurrected as a masterpiece of rarity and daring. What was once a symbol of corporate failure is now a badge of honor for those who want the weirdest piece of history they can find. The story of the R63 AMG is a dark lesson in the dangers of corporate ego. It is a monument to a time when a company was so blinded by its own success that it believed it could rewrite the laws of the market. It was a triumph of engineering over humanity, a machine that was technically brilliant but fundamentally homeless. It reminds us that success has a hidden cost. When you stop asking why and start obsessing over how much, you lose the very soul that made you successful in the first place. The R63 AMG remains a haunting ghost in the Mercedes-Benz lineage, a reminder of an era where ambition outran reality. It is a legend not because it succeeded, but because it dared to fail so spectacularly. It is a beautiful, loud, and incredibly fast mistake, a wolf in sheep's clothing that reminds us that sometimes the dark side of success is the only place where true legends are born. If you enjoyed this exploration into the shadows of automotive history, join us at the dark side of success. We uncover the stories that brands want you to forget, the ambitious projects that went wrong, and the legends born from the ashes of failure. Subscribe to ensure you never miss a chapter. Like this video if you believe that sometimes the biggest mistakes are the ones most worth remembering. And tell us in the comments, would you dare to own the fastest forgotten family car in history? Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for our next journey into the hidden costs of being the best.